All right. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, guys, and welcome to episode number 5 of our Ummahpreneur live podcast. This episode is taking place on the third day of Eid, guys. So I just want to give a special shout out and thank you to Cordelia for taking the time out of her day, out of seeing friends and family, to actually share her knowledge with us. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Cordelia, for being here. And to just introduce her really quickly, Cordelia is an author, a speaker, and an emotions transformation strategist. Now, what that means exactly is she really helps female leaders and entrepreneurs tap into their darkest emotions and their emotional self and use that, leverage it, know how to get in tune with it to actually find success in their business, in their personal life, in their fitness, in their physical body, and so much more. Now, I won't spoil this live for you, so I'll let her explain herself and answer these questions. But before we do, I just want to say welcome, Cordelia. Thank you for being on this podcast and taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much, Abi. I'm very pleased to be here, and actually it's a pleasure. So I am hanging out today for Eid, but like just my virtual family, that's what's up.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. That's awesome. Exactly. And we get to be with the audience here today, and you'll get to see that this is an amazing audience and these are amazing people that are always with us. Alhamdulillah. So before we dive into the nitty gritty and we dive into these questions that everyone wants to hear, I want to get to know a little bit about you, Cordelia, because the thing is, you are a mother of 6. Now, I come from a family of 6 children as well. I've seen my mother raise us. I've seen what she has to go through, and it's not easy. And you're still able to be an entrepreneur, take the time to get on these lives and do your thing. And so I just want to ask, how do you do this? And was it always this way, or did you have a job before and then did you become an entrepreneur? How did you go about, managing yourself, managing your time to be able to do this?
Yeah, those are all really great questions. And I'm glad that you have a unique perspective with the whole dynamic of 6 children in a home. So yeah, once upon a time, actually, I started out in corporate, and that's when we had our first 2 kids. And so I guess it was right around the time, it was about 16 years ago when we were expecting the third, that I left corporate. And I transitioned from being a work outside of the home mom to a stay-at-home mom. And I thought, oh, this is so nice. And, why not just, since I'm home and my older 2 were like 4 and 2, I was thinking I'll just start homeschooling. And it's cool and cute when they're 4 and 2, right? Because I'm really homeschooling one kid, really. But the great thing about that was, in that transition, I also joined like the local Umi and Me at the masjid here. And I started out just offering time management workshops at the Umi and Me, and doing different things like that. And so over time, like what I was practicing at home, I shared. And like as Muslims, right, it's like that's really something that we're encouraged to do, like as you learn, to teach somebody else. So that's just been what I've been doing for 16 years. So it wasn't much of a leap as I continued to have more children to keep doing that, because more children, then I have to, we had co-ops and Girl Scout troops and Boy Scout troops and all the things. And somewhere around the 5th child, I was like, okay, I really can't deal with this anymore. Oh my gosh. Like I really, like my self-nurturing practices needed a little upgrade. And so I got back to writing, which is something that I've always enjoyed, but it was not a public kind of writing. So I started a blog back in 2010. And just to help me to keep up with the pace of everything that mothering is, I did a lot of research about, stress management, parenting, how the child's brain develops, and emotional stability for children, and how to, raise your kids with compassion, and all those things I took from the studies of Tarbiyah. I took from,
Wow.
Of course, the Whole Brain Child and all those kind of books. And then I forgot his name, was this Michael Gerard, who writes specifically about boys, raising boys. because I have 2 sons and 4 daughters. Well, I had 3 daughters at that time.
Wow.
And just integrating all that stuff and wanting to, again, learn, process, use, teach. So then I sought to write not only on my own blog, but for online magazines. And here locally, I forgot the name of there's a local Muslim newspaper, and I used to write articles in there. But that's when I started making these online overseas connections, and the online parenting magazine I wrote for was actually in the UK. So after keeping that blog for like 5 years, I decided, I wonder if I have enough for a book, because everyone had always told me, write a book. And so I was like, okay. And so I had enough for a book. And that was 5 years ago after having my 6th child. And that's, how I got to where I am now,
Wow.
So it was like, subhanAllah, not even planned, I just really was like, okay, well, I'll write this book and I'll just do something different. I had a relationship with several local area masajid, and I was like, can I do workshops for sisters? And I just wanted them to use the information. So
you honestly had a journey where it sounds like you kind of like were slowly led to where you are today, or it was a journey, of course, of different paths that you took, and each step slowly led to where you are today. And it was a progressive journey, started with journalism and with doing workshops to bring you here. Now, a question for you that I have is, now that you are here, let's say we have other moms that have maybe 2 or 3 kids and they can't find the time to get on a live because they're just like, oh my God, there's so much. How do you handle that? Do you tell your children, okay, listen, this is me time from 9 to 5 and don't bother me? They'll come running into the room, or how does that work exactly? I'm just curious to know, and I'm sure other people are as well.
Yeah. That's a great question. No, I have agreements with my kids, and so they know my schedule the day before, and they're like, so Mom, what are you doing tomorrow? And I'm like, well, I have some interviews, I have a coaching session, and these are the times that we're going to spend together. So they record in their mind that, okay, from 8 to 10, we get to hang out with Mom. And then, she has a break, right? I always have break at the prayer times, and we have a specific lunch time.
Right.
And so they know when to see me. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't get interrupted. So like my youngest, she'll always pop in, maybe not now, because she literally came in right before I came into the StreamYard room, and she was like, Mom, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, I have an interview right now. Do we have an agreement that you're not going to come back? And she's like, yes. I said, okay. But, we had an agreement yesterday before my boot camp. I'm doing my 5-day boot camp this week. And we had an agreement, but she came in anyway, like 10 or 15 minutes in. And so to negotiate for popsicles, that's the best. And I was like, look, you know the deal, and she was like, okay. And then she says, but I just needed to give you a hug. And I was like, okay. So then I just,
how can you say no to that? I mean,
right? I'm like, all right, you know what? You're right. I needed to be loved up. I was a little nervous. Thank you. And so then I said, do we have an agreement? You won't come back. And so we shook hands and she left. Yeah.
Amazing. So you plan in advance and you let them know, listen, this is the time where I will be focused on work, and this is the time where I will be spending with you, which is, I find, even if you don't have children, even if it's just you and someone else, you're married, or even if you're alone, and I always talk about this with my students in our coaching program, the importance of scheduling your day the night before, the importance of knowing exactly what you're doing when you wake up. Do you think that has a big impact on your productivity and on your ability to achieve what you set out to achieve on a certain day?
Absolutely. And energetically, just to give it like another level up, I know like who I am and how I show up on certain days of the week. Like Mondays, generally I don't do interviews because that's not a peopling day for me. But Tuesdays, I'm really good at it. Thursdays, I show up pretty well. Fridays, not so much. So just knowing your energy levels and how you are certain days of the week. Wednesday is a day I like to do more like my one-on-one coaching, and my one-on-one coaching, meaning like I'm being coached, right?
Wow. Okay.
That's my receiving day. So like hump day, most people don't look forward to it. I look forward to it because like I'm getting poured into. So I have to, I schedule my life like that. My days, they have themes.
You mentioned an interesting word right now. You mentioned receiving day. And you mentioned also an interesting way to phrase that earlier, which is I'm getting poured into. And this is a very interesting metaphor and analogy that I haven't heard before. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Do you mean that, because again, we're coaches, we're entrepreneurs, we're so focused on giving. Is it also important at any level that you are to maybe also receive? And do you get to a point where you can stop receiving and you can just focus on giving? Does that ever happen?
Like what human can do that? I don't know. Is there a human that can do that? I can't. Like, I mean, even before I started coaching, I had a practice of at the end of every hour. And now this is something I recommend for my clients, that I just need to take like 5 to 10 minutes and just be with myself, So like back in the beginning with 2 kids, it was like I would hide out in the bathroom, but but eventually I became very open and honest about it. I'm like, look, it's mommy's time. So now, like sometimes if the end of the hour will approach and I didn't take time to myself, or I turn it a little bit into monster mom, my kids are like, Mommy, do you need some alone time? I'm going to close the door, and they just put me in my room. So yeah, it's so necessary.
That's amazing. And someone at your level, someone that's helping other people in terms of transforming into their darkest emotions, what does your receiving day look like? I'm curious. I just want to know, what does that look like? And maybe we can get inspired by that and get an idea of what we can do to fill our own cup, right?
Yeah. It really depends. Like I said, it depends on what I need that day. So what have I done today? Okay. So today, I always start out by moving into my body. Like movement is really important to me. I think most people are kinesthetic, whether or not they realize it. We're always taught to sit and meditate, and like, good luck with that. But I have to like move and meditate,
Right.
So, yeah, I tend to, not just exercise, but I would say like dance, like a full on. So I do a blend of eccentrics and African dance. I don't have a name for it, and I should probably trademark it and all that, but that's kind of what I do. And it's eccentrics is actually a methodology that was founded by Miranda Esmond White, who's from Quebec, actually.
Okay.
And yeah, so I've been practicing that for, I don't know, like 15 years. And it's really, she designed it so that you can actually heal your muscles and activate your mitochondria, right? So that's like the powerhouse of all your cells. And interestingly enough, it just happens to correlate to what I do with emotions, because your emotions are in all of our cells. And I don't think people realize that. I mean, there are just different energy centers for different types of emotions within our body, not just within our brain. But to do the moving meditation actually allows for you to detoxify your joints, where we happen to hold a lot of our negative energy. And she talks about this as she's going through. She's like, okay, and now just twist your arm and you're going to, what does she say? You're going to get your free radicals out. And really what that is all the toxins for all the yucky things you've been experiencing today. She like literally says that. And so that's a really major part of what I do when I pour into myself. Another thing is, I guess just today, that's all I've done, but yeah.
So I want to touch on that a little bit. And it's actually something that I've been getting into a lot more. I don't know if you ever heard about a concept called bioenergetics. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's something that relates, I think, to what you're saying. And it's an interesting concept. And it's, if you want to get out of your mind, you want to get into your body. Right. And I think it's such a key thing. And you mentioned also something interesting, that when you meditate, a lot of people think meditation is just, as you mentioned, sitting down and kind of emptying your thoughts and emptying your mind and being still. But it can also take the form of activity and exercise, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of people have felt that before, whether they went out for a jog or whether they went to the gym or to the weight room. You get to a point, you get into a state where all you can focus on is, lifting that weight, pushing yourself to run that extra half mile, whatever it is that you're doing. you get to a point where your body is so focused on that task because it's draining so much energy, and all you can do is focus on taking that next step. And one of the biggest reasons why I love going to the gym in the morning before I start my day is for that, because I wake up and I have a million and one things on my mind. And I'm sure we all do as well as entrepreneurs. I mean, you wake up and it's like, okay, I have to do this thing. I have to accomplish this task. And how do I release this new product or this new service? How do I get more clients? And to take a break from that, a lot of times you're going to try to sit down and meditate, and it's not going to work because your brain is just like completely filled. And so the best way exactly is just get into your body, guys. Go for a run, do some exercise. I think dancing is an amazing thing, and it can be done. Again, we might think, oh, but dancing in Islam, again, we're not saying go ahead and put yourself on live and dance in front of people. Go inside of a room and dance and exercise by yourself. And there's completely nothing wrong with that. You're moving your body, you're releasing endorphins and you're releasing sweat. And that's just getting you into your body and getting you out of your mind. And I think it's so powerful. So I'm really happy that you mentioned that. And I think it's a really advanced method. And I'm happy that we mentioned it. So in the same vein, Cordelia, how did you get to a point where you are now helping people tap into their emotions and use them for better, right? And you talk about tapping into your darkest emotions. What does that even mean? And does that also relate to what we're talking about now, bioenergetics and getting into your body? Or do you separate the two? I'm curious.
No, it's one and the same. I mean, it's so like for my replenish me process, right? The first step is release, restructure, refresh, rebirth. So release is what we're talking about right now, right? Just getting into your body, out of your head, separating from what's expected and accepted. And actually this concept, so what I didn't mention in my story is after I had my second child, I had a bout with postpartum depression. And, I new mom, new wife, new Muslim, right? So I was just like, well, Muslims are not supposed to be depressed. So I'm shaming myself, right?
Wow, okay.
And, as a mother, I'm supposed to connect with my kids and, oh my God, I loved my daughter, but I don't love my son. What's wrong with me? And I was like going to my doctor, because that's what you do, because they know everything. And my doctor was like, it's okay, darling. I'll give you some antidepressants. I was like, what? I don't need drugs, right? So I was like, okay, well, let's just see what we can do about this. So I ended up doing a couple of things. And that time I was listening to Purification of the Heart by Hamza Yusuf.
Oh, I love that series. Yes.
Yeah. I could like verbatim recite it to you.
It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. I completely agree. Yeah, I love that series.
So yeah, that's how I found out about Tasawof and Imam Ghazali. And then that led me to Dr. Ahmed Sakar, who writes about he has his book of healing. He has a lot of books, but in the book of healing, he connects the dots between like the elements of Tasawwuf and how to actually heal the body as a Muslim, right?
Yeah.
And heal your mind. And it's all through your heart. Now, I got over the postpartum depression part, but the part that really struck me was the number one recommendation was, an ungrateful heart is depressed. And I was like, I took issue with that, right? So I was like, I'm not ungrateful. So like for 5 years, I'm like trying to better like overcome my ego to really grasp the concept of gratitude. And ultimately, that's what squeezed out the darkness. And even now, when I have really difficult things that I go through, I get into the gratitude practices and actually a lot of what else was I reading? Right. So I've read like so many books. I'm trying to remember all of them. But anyway, the main thing is like a lot of the things that you'll read in Tasawwuf is all about how Allah has gifted us with emotions, because it's the bridge between our physical self and our spiritual self. And those more negative emotions like anger and sadness, frustration, these are gifts so that we can be closer to Allah and build our character. So it only just seems like a natural thing to do. And it's funny because all these years, like when I first started, like even my first book is called Workout Around My Day, the only health guide that moms need. So I was coming from a wellness, like a physical wellness perspective. But as I started working with women, it was very clear that it's an emotional issue. That's the barrier between their physical wellness. So then I was like, forget that. We'll just start with the emotions. And of course, because I overcame postpartum depression, mostly with the way I changed my eating, I can't separate that from nutrition or clearly movement because we've already talked about that piece.
So before we dive into your 3 steps to replenish and really break them apart, and I say dissect them because I'd love to do that with the audience and everyone that's watching today. I want to ask, did Tasawof have or the knowledge, and you mentioned about reading about Imam Ghazali, watching Purification of the Heart by Hamza Yusuf, which are all amazing resources. I personally am a huge fan of Imam al-Ghazali, and honestly, I have read his life story completely, cover to cover. I try to read all of his works, Ihya Ulumuddin, and all of his books, and he is just one of the people I admire the most in terms of Muslim scholars. Before his ability and his angle of approaching Islam from a really holistic perspective, as you're mentioning. A lot of people might think Tasawwuf, oh, does that mean Sufism? And Sufism, oh, that's bid'ah and that's that. And so we're not going to dive into that. But what I'm going to tell you right now for everyone watching, Tasawwuf is really just the spirituality, the spiritual aspect of Islam. And it's really the connectedness with God and the connectedness with the Prophet and getting in tune with that spiritual, that sweetness of faith that you want to taste when you perform ibadah, when you pray, etc. Right? Because it's not just about prayer. It's not just about, fasting and doing these actions, but it's also these actions are a means to an end. What is the end? The end is actually that spiritual connection with God. And that's why God created us and put us on this earth. It's to connect with him and know him. And we can only know him through performing actions that the Prophet ﷺ has recommended that will bring us closer to him, which is prayer, fast, and all sorts of ibadah. Now that I've cleared it up so that people don't come out of the woodworks and think we're trying to spread something here. So unfortunately, because it is what some people do.
I know.
Yeah. So now that I've cleared this up, do you think Tasawwuf has an impact on what you do with your clients and the work that you do in terms of tapping into your emotions? Do you think the resources that you've read and the books that you've read and even maybe some of the knowledge from Imam al-Ghazali, has that impacted what you do in your business and how you help people?
Yeah, I would say 100%. I mean, but also on the other end of that, I mean, I also read contemporary research, and I know like everyone's talking about Dr. Bruce Lipton and what is his name, Joe Dispenza and all those kind of things. But I'm going to tell you what, if I had to compare what they talk about to the actual scientists and doctors, like one thing we know is a lot of women are overlooked in, science.
Mm-hmm.
And so a woman that I really lean on a lot of her research is Dr. Candace Pert,
Okay.
who actually was born Jewish, but in the end, she found out some things in her laboratory at Johns Hopkins that led her to spirituality. And she, like, almost verbatim, like, mirrors what I read in Dr. Ahmad Sakhar's book of healing. And she breaks it down chemically. So she's found the peptide chain, which is a law, right? She found the peptide chain for our, what do you call those, opiate receptors. And she says things like, we are designed for bliss. That is exactly a sentence in the book of healing, in the chapter on I always call it the physiology of prayer, but he does break down what happens in the body when you pray and, why we need to ground. So like Muslims are cool with, I'm going to go to yoga class and, and I have to go outside and ground. Well, guess what? We ground 5 times a day.
Yeah.
We, we neutralize those electric charges in our brains and the 7 points of our joints. And when we do that, we're actually releasing the negative energy. And so when we're taught, right, to have khushu in prayer, it's really just being intentional in your movements so that you're in the positions for the natural scientific processes to happen that need to happen at those times of the day, because your body actually is begging for it. So like when you're cranky or when you can't focus, it probably means that you need to pray. And that's something that I've noticed. So that's the long answer, but yes.
100%. And a lot of people this is the purpose of it, right? It's not just, when we talk about the purpose behind it, it's not a mechanical action. It's not going and moving up and down. It's not meant to be exercise, even though it kind of is, and it's great for you. It's meant to actually do something more and do something deeper and allow you to take a break from the hustle and bustle of life and ground yourself and reconnect with the One, the Almighty. Now, Cordelia, let's dive into your 3 steps to replenish. Okay. And I want to learn more about that. You mentioned release. You mentioned that physiology and bioenergetics are part of that process, getting into your body and outside of your mind. What are the other steps? And can you just give us a little bit of an overview? I don't want you to reveal all of your secrets, but anything that can help the audience and maybe let them take that first step into tapping into their emotions that we need to all do right now.
Yeah, actually, you'd have to coach with me for years to get all my secrets, first of all, to be clear.
Of course.
It's kind of deep. So really, it's all about reprogramming the autopilot that's happening in our body, and our subconscious. So there's the release. We talked about that pretty much. So step 2 is restructure, which is all about the habits, and just it's a little bit deeper than replacing your not desirable habits with better habits. It's just looking at the things from the perspective of what are your personal values, separate from what you've been told your values are, and then honoring them, having that self-discipline within yourself, so that when we get to step 3, which is refresh, we can enforce other people honoring our values as well. So in the restructure, I take a little piece of that and do this 5-day boot camp to replenish and boost your immune system. And we look at the way you're sleeping, the way you're thinking, eating, moving, and dealing with your emotions. Refresh is now, what are the barriers in your life? Who are the barriers in your life specifically? And are you allowing people to steamroll your values and dishonor what you stand for? Or are you just saying, look, you're a barrier to my progress. Goodbye. So that's what the refresh is about. And then rebirth is more about standing in your complete truth and how you show up in the world, and in complete self-trust.
So you're mentioning something amazing, and I love it here. And you're mentioning that this whole process and what you take people through, there's different phases to it. Again, there's step release, and then you have a step where it's also acknowledging, are there outside sources that are still in your life that could possibly be weighing you down? And that's something that I feel every person should look at, because again, we are taught that, we want to be kind to everyone else. We want to show the best of us. But at the same time, I also think it's important to know, is this a beneficial relationship to have in my life, or is it not? And there's a hadith by the Prophet ﷺ where he says, and don't quote me word for word on it because I don't have it memorized, but it's something along the lines of that a good friend is like a perfume seller, right? And if you spend time with him, you will leave with the scent of perfume on your clothes. And a bad friend or bad company is like a coal worker or a blacksmith. And you might just leave with a bad scent or have stains on your clothes from being with them. And so it's, even the Prophet ﷺ mentions that, so there is the balance of having the best of character, knowing that we need to deal with people in the most kind of ways and in the best of ways, but at the same time also acknowledging that in that step, in these steps that you mentioned of getting in tune with your emotions and then you leveraging them for success, there is a part where you need to understand, what is my environment, and is there anything in that environment that could also be impacting me negatively? You also talk about something that I want to dive into, Cordelia, and you mentioned something about events that might have happened to you when you were 5 years old or younger and how they might be impacting you today. What is that exactly? Can we explore that a little bit more? Do you mean that things that we might have experienced in our childhood could have effects that are long lasting and that could be affecting my behavior today towards others? And if so, how do I even find that out? How do I recall that? Because I don't even remember what I was doing when I was 5. So where do I even start?
Yeah, we don't remember that. A couple of reasons, because it becomes it's a muscle memory, it's a sensory memory, and then more on the, I guess, closer to a conscious level, it becomes our programming. So now, like, a lot of our negative self-talk is not even our own talk. Like, we don't believe that. It's just something that was repeated so many times that we're just like, oh, I'm stupid. Oh, I'm dumb. Oh, I can't do this. Oh, I'm not supposed to do that because, but if you just sit with that for a minute and you pause and you're just like, wait a minute, what does that even mean? Like, where did that come from? And you may not immediately remember who it was that said it or what circumstance happened, but now it's living within you. And this is why getting into your body is so important, because, like I said, it's a muscle memory and it's a sensory memory. And the only way to bring that up is to move those muscles and to I'm not encouraging to recreate the memory, but it does happen. I mean, a lot of times in my workshops and coaching, like, people express themselves. And actually, one thing I really enjoy about my workshops, I don't do it so much on Zoom, but like when we're together, we scream, and it's really freeing. And that scream, like, the thing that people don't realize a lot, we're always told journal, and things don't have words. They just don't. I mean, even me, sometimes I just go out on trails, hiking. I love hiking, and I scream because sometimes I just don't have words, and it's okay. And like, I had a sensory memory the other day, and I was like, wow, when did that happen? And, like, I could remember, I felt all the things and the environment, but I couldn't actually see the faces, but I was hearing the words. You know what I mean? And I was like, whoa, I didn't even know I still had that belief, and I had to release that. I was like, that's kind of deep. So this is what I'm talking about. It's like, yes, we don't know it's there, but it's living in our body anyway. But we have to be open,
How do you like, you mentioned that you had a sensory memory and feelings came over you, but you can remember the faces. How do you pinpoint that? How do I know, like, okay, this is a moment where I could be having a memory like this? I don't even know what that's supposed to feel like.
Okay, so if I were to describe it, it's this really intense, like, I felt mostly in my heart space. I felt a tension in, like, my shoulders. I felt an impulse to, like, get up and go away. And yeah, so these are different energy centers. So heart is like, it can be one of two things. Either you feel like you feel intense, like, love, or if it's the opposite of that, that would be abandonment, right? Shoulders, usually it's not necessarily something that was yours. It may have been, like, I got the feeling I was in a gathering that was something for my parents. And, and it was like, it was not my energy, just knowing the fact that I felt it in my shoulders and the impulse to leave. So, like, our legs are more related to, like, pride, ego, grief. And so this would be, an embarrassment, you know what I mean? So when it happens just like that, it's just like in a split second.
How do you actually, like, when you feel that, what do you do? What is a proper response to that? Because sometimes I get these little random, I can feel anxious just at random, right? And what do I do in that scenario? Is there something that I should be doing that you recommend? I'd love to know.
Yeah, so that's a great way to put it. The normal person that's not self-aware would recognize this as maybe anxiety, right? Because again, you'll feel it in your stomach, like an intense stomach pain. This is like passion, fear, anger. In that moment, and in all moments like of intensity, I always suggest to lean into it and pause with it, right? Sometimes you can't immediately breathe, but as you're letting yourself feel it, there's even a hadith about, well, the hadith is actually about anger, but change your position. So if you're sitting, stand up. If you're standing, sit down. If you're, you can lay down, or, well, can't always lay down, but you know what I mean? Just change your position some kind of way. In my case, I just stood up and I moved my legs a little bit because it helps with grounding. In a different way, in a form of stability, and know that it's okay, because your emotions, they only last 90 seconds, at most 3 minutes. But even so, like if it's lasting up to 3 minutes, you can just breathe into it and lean into it, and wherever you're starting to feel tingling or intensity, just that's when you start to feel that intensity, that's when you start, send it love, breathe into that, and let the breath come out loud in your mouth, And
you mentioned something interesting, and I want to talk about it because it's something I discovered recently, and I'm really happy about where this live is going and this episode, because we're talking about things that I personally am kind of learning about. So talking to you, I get to kind of bounce off of you and get your feedback, which is awesome. Throwing temper tantrums as an adult. Okay. I've learned about that recently, and I've tried it. I won't lie. I've tried it, and it's mind-blowingly therapeutic. Like, guys, I don't know how to tell you how effective throwing a temper tantrum as an adult is to release emotions. And I'm not talking about, guys, when I say this, it doesn't mean throwing it on someone else. You have to be careful, okay? I'm not talking about throwing it on someone else. There's a very clear distinction here, because throwing it on someone else means you're throwing all that emotion on someone else, and that's not fair to the other person at all, and it's not something you should be doing. So just like Cordelia said, we know you can't just yell in your house or your room, most likely, and you're gonna have the cops called on you by your neighbors. One place that I did it, so I've been learning about this. I've been learning about bioenergetics, about just the power of yelling and screaming, because we have all these emotions that are building up inside of us, and that get stuck right here. They get stuck in our throat and in this area, and so they get stuck in our chest, and it causes all this tension that you're talking about, right? And so a lot of times as adults, we just think like we should just swallow it and keep it down, and that's honestly what I believed for the last over 20 years. I don't want to reveal my age, guys. I'll keep that a mystery. But that's how I thought I should live my life as a man, especially as men. We are always told that we should not be emotional. We should never shed a tear. We should never show emotions. We should be this hardcore, rock foundation for our family and the people around us, and we should never falter. And I think that is a very toxic belief to have. I think that every single person needs to take some time out, just like Cordelia is saying, and needs to either go on a hike, go in their car, or go somewhere where you have the freedom to yell, and just let it out. Just shout and yell and let all that frustration out, and you are going to be surprised. The last time I did this, and I'm going to share this on this live, and I don't want to ramble for too long because I want you to be I want the spotlight to be on you here. But the last time I did this in my car, I got super emotional for no reason. Like I just started yelling, and all of a sudden I just felt like this burst of energy exploding out of me, and I'm like, wow. And how was that, all of that inside me? And I started like tearing up. It was crazy, subhanAllah. And really the effectiveness of that, of just letting these emotions out. Because when you were children, and again, I won't talk for too long here, but when we're kids, it's like everything we feel, we immediately release.
Yeah.
Immediately, instantly. Like you look at children, you look at toddlers, you look at babies, the second they feel something, the second they're crying or they're yelling or they're happy, they'll show you, they'll make sure you know about it. They'll make sure if they're having fun, they're yelling for no reason, right? If they're mad, they're gonna yell. If they're sad, they're gonna cry instantly. But whereas as adults, we're sad, we bottle that up inside immediately. We don't show it. We don't even acknowledge it most of the time. If we're angry, if we're mad, if we're happy, we even, which is really sad. I spend so much time with people that we like. I have a lot of guy friends, obviously myself being a guy. And when we go out and we have a good time, it's like a taboo thing to like show that you're too happy about it. It's like, oh yeah, it was good. It was great. Like, you don't like, we don't show, no, this was awesome. Like that level of excitement is like, you shouldn't show that as a man, which is, I feel very sad because number one, you're not making the most of life. You're not letting these emotions be released. And eventually you're going to have so much bottled up inside that you're just going to be kind of like a soda can that's been shaked up and you're waiting to, once the bottle comes off, that's it, it's going to explode. And most of the time what happens is it explodes on other people. And they, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your children, they're going to get the short end of the stick, as they say. So just a quick tip, guys. I think what Cordelia is saying here is super powerful. The power of screaming, yelling, releasing these emotions. And I'll even add to that, throwing a temper tantrum. Like go into your car and just like bang on the seats and release and flail and do what you need to do. You mentioned dancing. Dancing is a great way. What are some other ways? I mean, just what do you think about what I'm saying here? Is it too much to throw a temper tantrum? Would you agree with this?
No, that's totally awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. I mean, like what you said, when you bottle it up, yeah, I call that emotional splatter when you throw it out on people that don't deserve it. And actually, yeah, for all the books I've read and all the things, quite honestly, a lot of the things that I do in my workshops, I got from the beautiful thing of watching my little kids. Like my 5-year-old, I talk about her all the time. She's like my major, well, she's 6, I'm sorry. Major inspiration in life. You know, she's just like, if she feels something, she just throws herself on the ground. I'm like, yeah. So like one day when I think she was 2, I did that. I was like, that's a good idea. So I rolled around on the floor with her. And she laughed at me, of course, right? But I was like, oh, man, this is why you do this. This is the light, you know? I was like, yeah, let's get into it. So, like, sometimes if I'm having a rough day on my breaks in between appointments and stuff, yeah, I'll roll down on the floor with my kids and we'll throw stuff and we won't pick it up because, like, who's going to clean up? No one's the adult, you know? And we roll down the hills, like when we, one of my kids still plays soccer. I had so many soccer players. Oh my God. Anyway, don't let me get started. I'm no longer a soccer mom because there's no soccer. Okay. But anyway, so what I would do during practices is while all the other moms were blah, 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 I would go and roll down the hills with my little girls. So yeah.
Amazing. And yeah, completely. I mean, it's funny because I discovered that recently while I was diving more into bioenergetics and releasing emotions. And it's just so powerful. It's so powerful. And it really helps you dramatically. And again, I started with that whole journey of going to the gym and getting into my body and out of my mind. And it just kind of progressed into wanting to learn more because it was so effective. So there's a lot being shared here and it's all extremely powerful. Cordelia, I have a few more questions for you before we dive into the Q&A portion of this episode. And guys, just to let you know, we are going to be having a Q&A as usual with every episode with our guests today with Cordelia. So if you have any questions about mastering your emotions, about throwing temper tantrums, if you want to put her on the spot right now, go ahead and ask your questions in the comments, inshallah, and I'll make sure to go through all of them for you. And for all those who already dropped questions, thank you so much. They will be answered in the Q&A, so stay tuned. So before we dive into the Q&A, I have a few more questions for you. One of the last ones is, you mentioned, and we touched upon that a little bit, but I'd just like to dive into it a little bit more. And you mentioned that you help people lean into their darkest emotions. What does that mean, lean into your darkest emotions? And a lot of people might think you should actually stay away from that and find a way to kind of separate yourself from it. But you mentioned lean into that. What does that mean exactly? And what does that process look like?
Yeah, so leaning into the emotions, I guess we have a visitor.
No worries. You can actually she can say hi to the audience. It's all good.
Do you want to say hi?
Oh yes, let's see it. Let's see it. Hello. That's amazing. I love it. MashaAllah. Who's visited us today? Who's this one?
This is Arlene. She's
Arlene, MashaAllah.
MashaAllah. Do you really want to get up here? Okay. All right.
Hello, Arlene. So we have an extra guest for you all on this live today in this podcast. Never seen before, Arlene featured. I love it. MashaAllah. She's beautiful. And seeing the love that she has for you is amazing, Cordelia. May Allah bless her and preserve her for you.
Oh. No, did you want to say hello? Or you have a request for mommy? Yes, tell me.
I wanted to have a popsicle to cool me down.
Oh, she's negotiating. That's it.
Popsicle to cool you down. Okay. All right. Can you get one also for Muniba? Okay. And do we agree that you won't come back? Okay. Can we shake on it? All right. Thank you. All right. She said,
that was. I just want to say, for all the moms out there, like, you just had a crash course on how to deal with that situation, by the way. So I hope you're all watching right now, because that was amazing, beautifully executed. And mashallah, may Allah preserve her and all of your children for you, Cordelia. They look beautiful. They look sweet. They look like they love you immensely, which is just a testament to you as a mother. So that's amazing, mashallah. May Allah preserve them for you.
I mean, alhamdulillah. So leaning into the emotions is, I guess it's kind of like that. And instead of, I could have been like freaking out, but it's just like, as it comes to you, just be with it. And don't name it, judge it, categorize it. And, this is something that I had I'm coming back to it. I used to encourage people to talk about it, but really it's not beneficial for you or for the person who has to listen, and this flies in the face of like talk therapy. There's really no benefit, because, it's that energy is coming out again, whatever that experience was, especially because a lot of times I work with women that have had really traumatic experiences that they may have forgotten. And when they do remember it, it's just like, they attach categories to it, right? They shame it, guilt it, whatever, judge it. And so to protect you, your heart, and your self-perception, I highly recommend that, like, when you're feeling into it, just be with it without naming it. And then, let it trickle down and, feel into your body, whatever that looks like. For women, probably to some extent for men too, we trap a lot of our repression in our hip area. So like moving, your hips and just being free with that. And I know that's like totally taboo for all of us, which is kind of funny, because like most Muslim countries are like where all the cool dances come from, which require us moving our hips. But anyway, that's a whole different show. So, and then if you need to speak on it, it would be in using words of self-forgiveness. I forgive you for not allowing, or I forgive me for not allowing myself to feel this before. And I promise to feel all of my emotions thoroughly. So that's the self-forgiveness, which again is a different vocabulary than we're used to, right? Because it's like, oh, I forgive you, whatever. It's not like that. It's like, I forgive you for not allowing yourself to be with yourself and to hold yourself. And the whole perspective is I use the word self-nurturing, and people mistakenly correct me and call it self-care. And it's not self-care. It's literally what I'm saying, right? Because my parents died before I got married and had kids. So I missed my mother always I've been raising my children. Yeah. So instead of being angry that she wasn't there for me, or that I had no mother, and my mother-in-law lives in Bangladesh, I was like, no, Allah gave me this opportunity so that I could mother myself. So when I say self-nurturing, that's what it is. You nurture yourself and hold yourself and hug yourself and really pour in to yourself in that way.
And what you just showcased is really a testament to your emotional mastery and the ability to look at the situation, an unknown element, a surprise has just, happened to you during this time. I mean, again, we are so focused on planning every step in our lives and planning everything. And we even talked about, planning our day the day before, but things will happen. Things will happen. And we talked about mastering your emotions for success in your business, in your life, in your relationships. I think the ability to properly react to the unknown is what will allow you to do that. And just like you've showcased to us so powerfully today, what are some, and I'll end with this and I'll ask you 3 more questions and we'll dive into Q&A, which is, what are some ways that, people like us who aren't so great at doing this, because what you just showcased, I probably would 100% panic and be thrown off and be like, oh my God, pause. Is there a pause on this thing, and freak out? How did you get to that level? Is there a certain process to it? Or are there some tips that you can give for people who tend to react instantly to kind of slow down and really master their emotions in a way that you've just showcased right now?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that question. Like, I get that question a lot, but I don't know. I don't really know what process I went through to get there. I know that I started live streaming when she was 1. So she has, awakened from her naps and surprised, showcased in many of my live interviews and, YouTube videos and podcasts. So, so maybe I'm just coming to maybe what the answer is. At that point she was 1, right? So she's a baby, and like, how natural is it for you to attend to your baby? And then, the needs are pretty simple, and in that relationship and that bond grows over time. So like, when I see her, I'm happy to see her, actually. And then I just know that she's coming to me because she needs some kind of, like, spark plug, like an emotional refuel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, at the minimum, I know that I get to give her a hug and a kiss, and that'll make her happy. It'll make me feel good. And then, she's of course going to negotiate for something. It's usually like chocolate or a popsicle. And I'm like, okay, whatever, man. We know that you're not supposed to have it until after lunch, but okay, that's all right. So, yeah.
And
I guess
so, but that's and I think that can be applied to most positive, I would say, unknown factors. So like, let's say, like, again, maybe in your relationship, something happens, but it's unknown, or your spouse maybe does something, your partner in business does something. You have to look at it just like you mentioned, which is you look at it from their perspective. And I think that the answer lies in the way that you responded to me, which is you look at it from your perspective, from their perspective, to understand what are they looking for from this interaction. And most of the time, it's not really anything bad, right? And it's usually out of love or out of something that is actually positive. However, of course, there are, just to play devil's advocate, there are some times where it could be a negative situation. It could be a competitor that's trying to attack your business, or it could be something that happened, maybe an accident, and it actually wasn't coming from a positive standpoint, or from a loving and caring standpoint. And so in that situation, what would be the best way to deal with that? Those type of situations where it's actually, we're facing negative energy, or maybe something that's a bit more on the dark side.
Yeah, well, that's easy too, because, there's what goes around comes around. And what I mean when I say that is, everything comes from Allah. So there's a gift in the lesson of dealing with that. And then when people think that they're taking from you, they're taking from themselves, because, this is an abundant life. This is an abundant world. And I've just seen the effects of what happens, right? Someone, they want to harm you, and inevitably they harm themselves. So I'm just like, alhamdulillah, it hurts, it's painful, but at the end of the day, it's a great lesson. And, they will get what they're actually due.
Right. So it's also important to remember that there is kind of like a higher power, and we all know that there is something at play here, and there probably is some sort of test, some sort of lesson that we need to learn, that we need to get out of it, and it's important to understand how to overcome it in the best way. And would you say that, like, if someone comes at us again and from a dark, a lot of people say, and there's actually that belief in Christianity, which is kind of like turn the other cheek. Is that the best way to go about it? Is it to really respond in what is better? And it is also a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. We know as Muslims, we don't necessarily have the turn the other cheek perspective, right? If somebody attacks you, then you better defend yourself. But we also know that you should respond with what is best. How do you balance both? Do you think regardless, it should always be with some sort of positive?
Okay, so in cases of extreme anger, I always like pause, right? So I take 24 to 48 hours to process stuff, and to plan and to take appropriate action. I didn't mean to imply that I'm turning the other cheek or anything like that, right? And the lesson is, okay, so maybe I need to read up on these trademark laws. Maybe I need to enforce NDAs. Maybe I need to look at better ways to protect my intellectual property. Maybe I should vet, I should come up with a criteria to vet my partners better. I mean, that could be another show, because I had some interesting situations all of 2019 for that.
Right.
So, but, in the moment, there's no point in damaging your reputation, right? Or making the situation worse by cussing the person out, although you may want to. That would feel so good. But, you can always just like scream aimlessly in their face with no words, which, legally can't really be misinterpreted. I mean, it would be really hard to like prove that scream meant something.
Right.
My dad was an attorney, so I always think of, how am I going to incriminate myself if I do or say something? So I try not to do or say anything. And so when people see me not react, I'm always thinking, what would my dad recommend, right? Coming from a legal perspective to protect my business. And then I'm like, okay, so, if I just, it's not going to like do anything.
Just let that emotion out.
But then again, like, why do that? It's like, why? Just don't. And then I just take my calculated, action.
So biggest takeaway: pause, retreat, like understand it, pause, retreat, and then come back at it when you have a clear mind, right? Like if I were to just kind of sum up here, and also for myself to be able to do this, the biggest takeaway that I'm probably hearing right now is, don't react instantly. Take the time to assess it, process it, and then take the time to react when you kind of have that. Again, our judgment is clouded when we have all these emotions running through. So take the time to pause, retreat, and then usually you'll have a much better assessment on what you can do and how you can react to certain situations.
Yes.
Beautiful.
100%.
Amazing. So there was so much value dropped on this podcast, Cordelia. With every guest, I have 3 questions that I like to ask before we dive into the Q&A, which is coming up very soon, guys. So if any of you have any more questions for Cordelia, I think we already have at least 8 or 10. So we definitely have our work cut out for us. But if you guys have more, drop them in the comments, inshallah, and we'll get to them. Cordelia, I have 3 for you. The first is, in your business, what's the biggest challenge you had to overcome, and how did you do it in terms of building this business right now, this coaching business that you have?
Self-doubt. I really struggle with thinking that how valuable is it what I do? And so the way I overcame that is I kept doing it, and so that I didn't have the doubt anymore.
Amazing. And I think that's something that a lot of us will probably struggle with. And I think I struggle with to this day. And I'm sure most people struggle with, no matter at what stage they're at. There's something we call imposter syndrome, right? And so I think everyone kind of feels that at some point. And it's important to remind ourselves what we've done all the way up to here to get to where we are, and also what we're trying to achieve. And I think just reminding us of that vision is one of the keys to get us there, which is something that I remember taking from Shaheen in a previous episode. So shout out to her. Another question that I have for you is, what's the greatest lesson you've learned from being a mother and an entrepreneur? So a mompreneur, what's the biggest lesson there?
That mothers really are leaders. And, one of the things that drew me to Islam is when I read that women are considered the pillars of society. And so this has been like a total proof of that.
Amazing. And we know from the Prophet ﷺ that the paradise is under your mother's feet, which is just a testament to the importance of a mother in the household. So I completely agree with you on that. And one last for you before Q&A, if you could meet Cordelia from, I would say 3-4 years ago, or even longer, when you were just getting started, you were still writing those articles and you still were running these workshops in the masjid, and you weren't really too sure where this was going, and you could tell her one thing, what would that one thing be?
Don't stop.
Amazing. Keep going. Powerful. And I think something that everyone needs to hear today, because a lot of people, again, they might feel like, man, this is not going where I want it to go right now. I'm not seeing the progress that I would like to see in my business. I'm maybe not at the level that I'd want to be. And I think keeping it simple is the key. Don't stop. Amazing and powerful. Thank you, Cordelia. So are we ready for audience Q&A? Are you ready to do this?
Yes.
Let's do it. All right. Bismillah. So we have a few questions here, and we got at least 8 or 10 here that we're going to dive into. So inshallah, we're going to talk them one at a time. Guys, if you have more, drop them in the comments. We'll try to answer each and every single one of them. But of course, if we're tight on time, then I'll just go ahead and run through the most important ones. But inshallah, we'll try to do them all. So let's start with the first one, which is how do you differentiate meditation, which is what we talked about earlier, with contemplation? And I think it's a great question, because we also talked about Imam Ghazali and his teachings and purification of the heart. What you think as coaches, should we practice more, meditation or contemplation? So what is the difference between both, and which one should we practice more?
So meditation opens up your mind and heart so that you can contemplate clearly. I don't know that there is one more than the other. I think you should give space to both within your day. And maybe, I firmly believe it depends on your personality type, but the time of day that you're easiest to meditate, right? It's easiest for you to meditate, spend time with that. And then the time that it's easier for you to, to process and contemplate, you should spend time on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's not really about what we should practice more, but more about what is going to bring us what we feel is what we need in this very moment. Is it contemplation, is it meditation, and then going with that? How do we differentiate between both? And again, I have an opinion on this, and I would think, again, meditation is more clearing your mind completely, whereas contemplation is about really focusing on a certain, whether it's a name of God, one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whether it's one of the attributes, or even if it's just gratitude and being focused on what you have and what you're grateful for, but you're focusing on a certain aspect, on something, and then just really immersing yourself in it. Can I get your comment on that, Cordelia? What do you think about that?
I agree. So the meditation is really for the clearing ground, right? Mm-hmm. So like in theory, that's something you should do at the beginning of the day. Unless you're a night person, then you would do that at your end of your day, so that in the morning, maybe you can focus more on, one aspect or the other. I feel like spiritual practices are the highest form of self-nurturing. So you can't do everything in one day. And I know, like, there are people that I know that have practices that are like from 90 minutes to 4 hours. I don't even know how you can do that. But, if you could just take like 10 minutes to meditate, and then maybe 10 minutes, because, one of my dear friends from Somalia, she said, you know what? I know you want to memorize whole Quran. Just take 2 ayat a day. I was like, oh, subhanallah. So that's what I would say with contemplation. Take 2 ayat a day, not 2 ayat, but you know what I mean? Just like 10 minutes, keep it small and consistent.
Mm-hmm. And consistency is the key. And we know, again, from the Prophet ﷺ that God loves consistent actions, no matter how small, instead of large actions that you just do once and forget. Consistency is what God loves. And so it's just an amazing thing that you've recommended as well. So I want to thank you for that, Cordelia. We have another here. What is the hardest emotion to deal with? Should we address it at the very moment we feel it, or should we allow it to dwell a bit for proper processing in our brains? We touched upon that earlier, so I think we can answer that fairly quickly, but what are your thoughts on it?
It depends on who you are. Sometimes sadness is hard for people. Sometimes anger is hard for people. Again, that's a personality type question, I think. And then address it in the moment. Address it in the moment is kind of different from leaning into it. Allow the emotion to come through. But like I always say, it doesn't always have words. So the processing is going to come later. Quite often, my difficult emotions, it takes me another 2-3 days before I get the clarity of what is the lesson there.
Right. 100%. And we talked about that earlier, the importance of just taking the time you need to assess it, right? So whatever time it is that you need for yourself, it's not going to be a global answer or universal answer. Just like Cordelia mentioned, some people might struggle with sadness. Some people, it might be anger. Some people, it might be anxiety. It might be this feeling of stress or anxiety. So whatever it is for you, you probably know it inside of you. And take the time you need until you feel like you're ready. You're ready to answer it. And that's whatever time it could be, whether it's a day or two or even a week. Let's go ahead and dive into some more. As a caregiver, and this is Askarina that asks, as a caregiver, I sometimes get drowned into the client's negativity. So what is the easiest and most effective way to handle this situation? That's an interesting question. I'd love your opinion on that.
Assalamu alaikum. How are you? I know her.
Amazing. Awesome. Alaikum salam.
Dear sister from Indonesia. So, since that is your profession, I recommend that you go in with what I call reinforcement. So, come in with your force field, right? It's great to have a deep listening ear, but, shield your heart from the people, right? It sounds you may also be an empath. So you may feel them more deeply than other people. So it's really important that in that case, before you go to work or you start working with people, you fill yourself up with what I call a love bubble. And whatever that is for you, that fills you up and makes you full so that you're impenetrable and that you can, when people start dumping, right, doing their emotional dumping, then you can
people love to do.
They love it, right? So then you can come from a place of unconditional love, which is different from loving someone, and that there creates a distance, kind of exactly how, what is it that you're seeking? Turn on your logical mind. What is it that you're seeking? And listen deeply from that perspective, right?
And you're mentioning something powerful, and we talked about it a little bit earlier on in the podcast, and it's filling your cup, the importance of filling your cup to be able to handle these type of situations. If you're coming into work and you haven't filled your cup, and we're not talking about your cup of coffee right now, we're talking about your emotional cup, the metaphorical one inside of you, whether it's taking the time to hug your children and get that love from them, or your spouse, or just taking the time for yourself. If there's nothing wrong with being a single person and just taking the time to go to the gym or something that fills you up. And for a large part of my life, going to the gym was that for me. Then once you do that, you're going to be so much more well-equipped to tackle the day and anything that might come at you, inshallah. So powerful answer there, and definitely something that I agree with. Let's do a few more. We have so many in the comments. So with your permission, Cordelia, we'll go ahead and dive into as many as we can. Let me know if we're taking too much time. So we have one more here. How do you teach people emotional intelligence? I find that people connect better when they get this with each other, and it can avoid a lot of pain. Instead, cultivate love, which all humans thrive with. So how do you teach people emotional intelligence? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically what I've been saying most often, and when you're self-aware and understand your emotions, you lean into them and you understand how you process them, you're curious about them, you see it as an opportunity, you see it as a lesson, it becomes easy to radiate that, when you work with other people. So that's basically my process. Get curious. It's not a curse to feel. Don't numb, don't avoid, don't ignore. The first thing I encourage you to get in tune with, I mentioned briefly about energy centers, right? And this is like documented, especially like in the Unani Tib, which I didn't really talk about. Tib, it's the Islamic practice of medicine. And you may lightly know of it, just one of the things we know is the using food as medicine, but you can feel whatever you're feeling in your body when the emotion comes, for you what that means. So I teach people to be aware of where they're feeling what in their body. It's also called triggers when you come to like what vocabulary, what words people use, and you have some kind of physical response to that. Just being aware with those things, and then once you're in the knowing of the pattern of how your body behaves with certain words, certain situations, or even certain people around you, then you are better prepared to know how to respond instead of react.
I completely agree. And something that I also want to add on to that is the importance of approaching that kind of situation where you want to connect better with people and you want to, again, as you mentioned, avoid lots of pain and cultivate love. The ability of demonstrating genuine interest in others will allow them to react differently to you. And so, as you mentioned, Cordelia, we can't control others. You can't really teach someone else something, not in a quick interaction, but you can at least control how you approach the situation. And if we approach it from a standpoint of genuine interest and curiosity in the other person, a genuine level of caring, then that usually results in them returning the same to us. And also just feeling better about their interaction with us and being more open as well, which leads to better friendships, better relationships all around. I have two more for you, inshallah, and then we'll go ahead and end with that, Cordelia. One is a question that I think you would be perfect to answer, and it's, that person is asking about new Muslims. I remember I often had schizophrenia emotions in the beginning as a new Muslim, and it still comes up on special occasions. What would you recommend to a person who just reverted? You mentioned when you just reverted as well, you were dealing with certain emotional issues or anxieties, and you had to overcome that as well. So what would you recommend for this person right here?
Okay, so when you say schizophrenia, first of all, I don't know if that's like something that's actually been diagnosed. So,
Okay.
Whatever the doctor has prescribed for that, you deal with that in that way. But for like a regular emotional level, be kind to yourself, right? So Islam is a mercy to mankind. It's not a burden to mankind. So what I'm going to say next is why I'm laughing. You're going to hear a lot of things from a lot of people from a lot of different cultures at the masjid, and don't listen to them. Whatever you read, in the Quran or whatever books you were studying that encourage you to become Muslim, that's the truth. Okay. And you're supposed to be pleasing Allah. So, not people.
That's an effective way to do it. And I think that's probably what this person needed to hear for most reverts, because they get into this, and I think it's something that us Muslims need to work on a little bit more. Is we get so excited and we're like, oh, okay, here, read this and do that, and go ahead and follow this, and we want to make sure that they do everything that we're doing. But I think an important part of that is to understand that person just entered into a whole new world, and they need to take some time to get acclimated. And there's nothing wrong with, as you mentioned earlier, there's nothing in the podcast, there's nothing wrong with feeling depression, feeling stress, feeling anxiety, whether you're Muslim or not. These are human emotions and they will come up. Islam doesn't shield you magically from feeling. You're going to feel all sorts of things, and hopefully for the better. But hopefully it will also allow you to deal with them in a more proactive way, in a more positive way, and give you a sense of peace when you connect to God, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So thank you for that answer. We'll dive into one more. Let's go ahead and let's do here. So this is a good one that I want to ask for you. And for all those that I couldn't ask Cordelia, inshallah, what I'll have her do is go through the comments for all the other ones. And if you could just take a minute to answer them on your own time, just because I don't want to keep you on for too long. And we want to make sure that Arlene gets her popsicle and she's happy. So how do you teach girls or adult females who had childhood abandonment from their fathers to be emotionally stable when they go into a relationship with another man? I think that's an amazing question. So I wanted to make sure to ask that to you. So abandonment issues, daddy issues, as they say in the common term.
Right, daddy issues. You know, the main thing that comes up for me is if you have unresolved abandonment issues, question whether or not you're ready to get married. And then when you're seeking a spouse, it's really super important that you vet him carefully. I'm laughing again because what I'd like to do for my daughters is I'm going to get the psychological profile of his family. I'm not even kidding, because I'm convinced that something happened between 1965 and 1980 to all the men, because there's a high percentage of narcissists out there. And, you know, it's a high possibility that if you have abandonment issues with your father, that you're going to be codependent, which is going to give you a very unsuccessful marriage and a very unhappy life. So I'm not even joking. I would straight up get a psychological profile on his family. And if he has a problem with that, then he's not the one for you. But just on a personal level for yourself, be sure that you're in a heart space and a mind space to be in a relationship, because like marriage is, ideally, inshallah, it's for a lifetime. So you want to make sure that you're partnered up with someone who can be the whole person next to your whole person, which means that you have to be a whole person in order to get married. So if you don't feel whole, don't get married. That's what I would say.
100%. A lot of people kind of feel that, they might have a sort of emptiness inside, and they usually jump. We can see them. They're jump from relationship to relationship, and they don't like to be alone. And I think these are the people that most need to take the time to be alone, to be able to understand how can I be alone and still be happy within myself before I join up with someone else. So thank you for that answer. I know I said it was the last question, but I have another last one that is so good.
Let me check my clock. Okay.
So
we're full. No, I have something
awesome.
At noon. So
all right, awesome. So this is the very last one, inshallah, guys. You better give Cordelia a shout out and a thank you, Jazakallah khair, for taking her time to spend with us today, guys. And it's just because this is such a good question that I want answered on this live. And we'll end with that, inshallah, which is, Riz has a question, which is, she's heard that women carry trauma around their womb. So pregnant women, and that can cause issues with hormones and reproduction. So what are your thoughts? Again, this might be a more medical question, but I'd love to get your opinion on that.
So it's not really that much of a medical question, although the research that Dr. John Sarno did, he does look into chronic pain, and a lot of the patients that he studied are women, and so there is, like a disassociation sometimes if there was something traumatic that happened. And women can hold things in that space. And that's why I was mentioning earlier, this is a good reason why women should move into their bodies, and especially the hip area. When one of the things that I learned during, I actually wrote a book about pregnancy that I have copyrighted, but I've never released it. But in that book, I talk a lot about the importance of moving the wound space during pregnancy. And even I have a section there talking about conception. So if you have issues with conception, that is a great way to release it. So
out of your body and into your out of your mind and into your body, what we spoke about. So do you think in terms of, and you mentioned something, your hip space. So depending on where you're kind of feeling that tension in your body, should you focus more movement on that specific area? So let's say in your chest, should you kind of move your chest a little bit more? If it's, as you mentioned, if you're pregnant and it's in your hips, should you move that a little bit more? Does that affect as well?
So, I mean, even preconception, I actually met a friend in Australia who came up with something called embodied birth. At the time I met her, it was called belly dancing for birth. She's a Palestinian background, and she really goes through all the things that you need to release that trauma from that wound space area. So yeah, I would say look into embodied birth if you're seeking to conceive, or you're currently pregnant, or you're looking for ways to release trauma in that area. And then, you know, she even now like has developed her body of work to more address hormones and reproduction and everything. So that would be a really great resource if you have more questions about that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, and for taking the time to answer that question, Cordelia. So before we end, how can people connect with you? So a lot of the audience here seems like they just absolutely loved the episode. And I know I did too, just based on the number of questions and engagement that we have. So I know everyone loved this. How can people get to connect with you more and follow you and take some of your content and maybe even work with you? Where should they go?
Yeah, it's like, I make it super easy. So my website is my name, CordeliaGaffar.com.
Awesome.
I hang out mostly on LinkedIn. I kind of put my fun stuff on Instagram, and then, you know, I'm here on Facebook, also under my name. My favorite place to hang out with women, I've created a free Facebook group called the Replenish Me group.
Amazing.
So if you're because I think there's another Replenish Me something, but it's Replenish Me, and you'll see my name in brackets. So yeah.
Awesome. So inshallah, I will be putting the links to all of that in the description, guys, and in the comments. So the link to her group, the link to her website, Instagram, LinkedIn, and all that good stuff. So make sure that you just revisit this episode for all the links. Cordelia, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Jazakallah khair. I believe that we touched on so many powerful topics in this episode, and it was absolutely value-packed. And I just want to take the time to truly thank you from the bottom of my heart on behalf of my audience and our viewers as well, for taking the time to answer our questions, to share some of your knowledge, and just to spend time with us today. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I love your group. I love what you're doing. And it's a really great energy here. So jazakallah khair.
It's our pleasure, guys. If you want to watch these podcasts every week live inside of our Facebook group, okay, well, the link is in the description. If you're on YouTube, if you're in Facebook and you're watching this, then you're already part of it. Every Tuesday, inshallah, we go live with a special guest. Tune in next week. And if you want to listen on audio, make sure to check out Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all that good stuff, inshallah. We'll see you next episode next week. Assalamu alaikum.